Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. My name is Sanj and today we're going to look at dividend focused ETFs or high yield ETFs or income focused ETFs. Now I've had a few requests for this video or something along this line, so I thought I'd put this video together where we're going to go through 4 ETFs based here in Australia that are focused on generating dividends from Australian companies. And I thought we'll focus on Australia because generally if you're doing this, you also want to take advantage of franking credits, which only occur when you're investing in Australian companies. As usual, I have broken up the videos into the different components, so you can feel free to skip ahead. And I'm saying that because I want to spend a couple of minutes up front going through a couple of overview items or a couple of basic things around these ETFs that I wanted to cover off before we went into the direct comparison. And it's because I wanted to make sure everyone is on the same page around what the purpose of these ETFs are. So if you're looking at this particular video, if you're looking at these types of ETFs, in my mind, you've come in through this process. And because I have a chemical engineering background, I see everything as a process flow. So you've decided to start investing. You've made a decision between being income focused and growth focused. And you've gone down the income path. You've said instead of going down the individual shares, you want to go down ETFs, and you've decided to look at this whole high yield ETFs or income focused ETFs. The alternative is looking at REIT ETFs, which I did cover off around. Another way of putting it is property ETFs, which I did in a different video. But that's where this video kind of lies, is the whole idea of high yield ETFs. Now, you may not have realized that's what you've essentially gone down the path of, but that's sort of how I see it. Now, this may not be officially how all the professionals look at it, and I'd encourage you to seek some professional advice on how to look at this particular ETF, but this is sort of the category I see it in, is you're income focused, you're not too fussed with looking for individual shares, you just want a collective ETF selection, and that's where we've ended up here. The other reason I bring it up is because if you've decided to go down the income component path, it's potentially because you're keen to have that dividend yield, or you want to get that 4, 5, 6% yield plus franking benefits now today, rather than maybe get the capital gains in the future, at which point you want to sell down your portfolio in the future, or switch it over to being more income focused. So that's more the right hand side. That's a different set of ETFs you'd be looking at. So the 4 ETFs we're going to look at today are from the usual suspects: Vanguard, iShares, Russell, and State Street with their Spider product. And the idea with these ETFs is the ETF company has picked a index that is specifically looking at Australian companies that pay relatively high dividend yields. They pay out a lot in terms of their profits, in terms of dividends to shareholders, and there's got quite a good stability in terms of those payouts, and probably has pretty good franking credits as well. And if you combine that together, you get these types of ETFs that basically help you get good yields, and they'll pay out good income in terms of your returns over time. Now, the 4 ETFs, I usually go through this process of comparing each one and calling out different elements. But with this particular set of ETFs, there's actually one very clear standout. And if you followed a few of my videos, you would have seen it already. And when you look at this list, and I'm just going to call out that ETF and look at everything else in comparison to it. And it's clearly the VHY Vanguard Australian Shares High Yield ETF. And the reason I say that is because look at that market cap, look at the fees, look at the number of holdings and the returns, plus even the franking element. So what do I mean? 1.92 billion in terms of market cap. That is quite big. It's bigger than all of the others, almost 10 times, maybe a little bit less, bigger than all the other ETFs. And that's telling me there's quite a lot of money invested in it. Quite a lot of people pick this ETF as a great option to use when they want to pursue high income ETFs. Fees, again, it is only 0.1% smaller than broadly the rest, but it's something to call out, 0.25%. And this is probably because they've got the benefits of scale. When you have so much money invested in your particular ETF, you're in a better position to negotiate lower fees from your index provider. Look at the number of holdings, 62 against everyone else. That means there's 62 companies it's invested in. Now, if you go to the particular Vanguard website, you can see all the different companies that it's invested in, but 62 means it's quite a broad base that it's using to invest in. Now, when we look at the 4 ETFs, this is where I'd call out some nice variation if you are someone who's got a bit of an ESG focus, because VHY does not have much of an ESG focus. And this is the environmental sustainability and governance focus, which a lot of people now want with their particular investments. You want to be investing in companies that are doing good in terms of the environment and sustainability and have good governance around them. And this is where you see a slight separation between VHY and IHD, where IHD has a bit more of a ESG filter. Now, I'll throw up on the screenshot where iShares says they've got different records, and you can see, you can read the documentation, but they pretty much say that they've got AAA, 100%, 10 out of 10, great MSCI ESG coverage. I haven't gone into the detail, but they're trying to say it's got really good ESG scores compared to maybe some of the other ETFs out there. So that's where, if you want to have a bit of a, if you want to be income focused, but you want to have a bit of a ESG focus, that's where something like IHD sort of stands out by itself. Otherwise, VHY is still the key ETF to take on. Now, returns. This is where I guess everyone is keen on. I've broken up intentionally the income and the total returns. And this is because I haven't really talked about this in previous videos, but I want to work through two components. So often when you're looking at total returns from an ETF, you're looking at two things: growth and income. And you'll see the ETF documentations, the different ETF companies will call this out. They'll say, what's the growth? That's the capital appreciation of that particular ETF holding, the underlying holdings, versus or combined with the income, which is the distributions that ETF has given out. And when you see an ETF that is more focused, or let's say less focused on income, you'll see there'll be more towards growth. More of the total returns will come from growth compared to the income component. Whereas an ETF, such as these ETFs that are very much focused on income, will have a large chunk coming from the income component and a small amount coming from the growth side of the ETFs. A quick analogy to help you digest it is like saying you own a house. And there's two components to the value of your house. There's the amount your house goes up in value over time. So you buy it for $500,000, it's worth $600,000 the next year, and then $700,000 the next year. That's really good growth, but that's the capital gains it's generating. But then if you rent out that house will also help you generate a type of income. So that's sort of the dividends. So if you look at owning a house, you could say there is both the capital gains component and the income component that you could get from a house. Now, I've simplified it. There's so many other elements of owning a house and various things you have to net off against it, but that's the idea. There's two components to when you own an asset, is generally the income generation component and the capital gains component. And it's no different with ETFs or generally owning a company as well. So going back to that table of comparison where I had the total returns and I had the income component, that's what I'm trying to call out to you, is to say, hey, there is a total returns component, but most of that is made up of the income. Because you can see, if look at VHY, 7.9% against 6.4%. That's only 1% coming from capital gains. So you're taking all those returns from distributions or from the dividend payouts. And that's what you wanted though, right? That's what you wanted, is you wanted income today rather than capital gains in the future. And that's where that whole narrative around income versus growth comes into play, is the people who would buy these ETFs are generally people who are retired today, or they're looking to retire quite soon, and they want income generating ETFs rather than the capital gains. That doesn't mean though you can't also retire off a capital gains ETF, but we're now leaning into this whole narrative between income versus growth and where you should be going. And I should do a video on that in the future, but if you're not sure what I'm going on about, just Google or go into YouTube and type in income versus growth, ETFs, what's best, all of that. And there'll be great amounts of explanations out there for you. An idea for a future video that I actually just came up with as I was preparing for this video was looking at VAS versus VHY. And in fact, maybe expanding it out to look at VAS versus VHY versus VAP, because that would be a great comparison to help tease out these concepts around income versus growth, dividends, franking credits, the composition of the different ETFs. All of those things would sort of come out when you have to force yourself to look at these three different ETFs. So feel free to leave a comment below in terms of these ETFs if you have any thoughts, any questions that you want to share. And please do consider subscribing for future videos along these lines, especially that video around VAS, VHY, VAP, or the concepts around income and growth, because I think those would be interesting topics to have a look at in the future. So please also check out my other videos, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.